The question nobody asks. Have you ever noticed that the hardest English sentence to say is not "How are you?" but "I'm tired of trying"? If you are watching this video right now, there is a good chance you are exhausted, not just from learning English, but from failing quietly over and over in your own head. You listen, but you don't understand fast enough. You speak, but your voice sounds wrong to your own ears. And somewhere between another video and another app, you start asking yourself a dangerous question: maybe English is not for me. Today, I want to ask you a different question. A question nobody asks. And strangely, this question changed my life, my English, and my love story in America. Imagine this. You are in a country where even the weather speaks a different language. The air feels sharper. The seasons don't behave the way you expect. People smile, but you are not sure what they really mean. And every simple conversation feels like a small test you didn't study for. That was me, standing in the United States, 2 weeks ago, holding a cup of coffee that tasted unfamiliar, listening to English flow around me like fast-moving water. I could hear the sounds. I knew the words. But my brain froze. It was like standing in the rain and somehow still feeling thirsty. Here is something nobody tells you about learning English as an adult. Your problem is not vocabulary. It is not grammar. It is not even pronunciation. Your real problem is safety. Your brain does not feel safe enough to learn. Neuroscience shows that when the brain senses stress, shame, or fear, it switches from learning mode to survival mode. In simple words, your brain stops absorbing and starts protecting. That is why you forget words you already know. That is why your listening feels worse when you try harder. Basically, your nervous system is throwing a quiet tantrum on your behalf. I didn't understand this until I fell in love. And no, not the romantic movie-style love you see in dramas. I mean the uncomfortable, uncertain kind of love that starts before money, before success, before everything looks good on paper. The kind of love that asks a question most people avoid. I fell in love before he was rich. And before you laugh or judge, let me ask you something honestly. Would you? 2 weeks ago, my English was shaky. My confidence was worse. I could read. I could listen slowly. But speaking felt like walking on thin ice. Every sentence carried the fear of sounding stupid. And then there was him. Not rich. Not impressive by social media standards. Just calm. Patient. And strangely, safe. When he spoke English, he didn't rush me. When I answered slowly, he waited. When I searched for words, he didn't finish my sentences. He let silence exist. That silence did something powerful to my brain. Psychologists call this low-pressure input. When you remove judgment and time pressure, the brain opens up. Language starts to stick. Not because you force it, but because you allow it. I didn't learn English from textbooks during those days. I learned it from moments. From weather conversations like, "It's colder than I expected," and him replying, "Yeah, this state surprises people." Simple English. Real English. English that lives inside daily life. And here's the strange part. When my heart felt calmer, my English became clearer. When I stopped trying to sound smart, I started sounding real. You see, motivation doesn't come from discipline alone. It comes from meaning. When English became a bridge to connect, not a test to pass, I stopped fighting it. I started using it. Many people quit learning English not because they are lazy, but because they are lonely. They practice alone. They fail alone. They judge themselves alone. And the brain hates loneliness. Studies show that emotional connection increases memory retention and comprehension. In other words, your brain learns better when it feels like it belongs somewhere. So let me ask you the question again. Not about money. Not about love. But about learning. Would you stay with English if it didn't promise success right away? Would you keep going if progress looked slow and invisible? Would you choose consistency over excitement? I didn't choose English because I felt confident. I became confident because I stayed. Slowly. Awkwardly. Imperfectly. And I stayed because English stopped being a performance. It became a relationship. This video is not here to impress you. It is here to sit next to you. To breathe at your speed. To remind you that learning English is not about proving intelligence. It's about building trust, with the language and with yourself. And just like love, the real question is never, is it perfect? The real question is, would you still choose it before it looks successful? Landing in a different America. The first thing you notice when you land in America is not the buildings, not the cars, not even the language. It's the feeling that your internal clock is broken. Your body wakes up when it shouldn't. You feel hungry at strange hours. The sunlight feels too bright or too cold, depending on where you are. And suddenly, everything you thought you knew about normal stops working. This is where my real journey began. Not in an English class. Not with a textbook. But with jet lag, unfamiliar weather, and a quiet sense of being out of place. 2 weeks ago, I stepped into a version of America I had only seen in videos. The climate surprised me immediately. The air felt thinner and drier. In the morning, it was cold enough to make me hug my jacket tighter. By the afternoon, the sun warmed everything like it had changed its mind. Back home, seasons had patterns. Here, the weather felt like a conversation you had to listen to carefully every day. People talked about it constantly. It's warmer than usual. The winter came late this year. This state has crazy weather. Simple sentences. Simple English. But when you're tired and overstimulated, even simple things feel heavy. I remember standing outside a grocery store, watching people load bags into their cars with quick, confident movements. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, pretending to check my phone, just to avoid another small interaction. That's when it hit me. In America, independence is not just a value. It's a lifestyle. People expect you to speak up, to ask questions, to say what you want. And if your English is slow, the world doesn't stop. It keeps moving. This is where many English learners begin to panic. You think your problem is pronunciation or listening speed, but underneath that is something deeper. It's cultural shock. In psychology, this is called cognitive overload. Your brain is processing new sounds, new social rules, new environments, and new expectations all at once. When that happens, learning slows down. Not because you're incapable, but because your brain is busy surviving. I felt this every time I heard fast English in public spaces. At cafes, people ordered without hesitation. At the counter, the cashier smiled and asked questions I wasn't ready for. Paper or plastic? Any rewards number? Do you want a receipt? These sentences are not hard on paper, but in real life, spoken quickly, they feel like surprise quizzes. My heart raced. My mouth dried. Sometimes I answered correctly. Sometimes I smiled and hoped for the best. What made it harder was the cultural style of communication. Americans are friendly, but direct. They don't circle around a topic. They expect responses. Silence feels longer here. Back home, pauses are normal. Here, pauses feel like confusion. And that pressure seeps into your English. You rush. You guess. You blame yourself. But something interesting happened as the days passed. I started noticing patterns. The same phrases repeated everywhere. The same greetings. The same polite questions. My brain slowly began to relax. Neuroscience explains this as pattern recognition. Once your brain recognizes familiar structures, it uses less energy. Anxiety drops. Comprehension rises. You don't need to understand everything. You just need enough repetition in a safe context. That's when love quietly entered the picture again. He noticed when I was overwhelmed before I said anything. When I struggled to understand someone, he didn't correct me immediately. He explained later, calmly, in simple English. They were just asking if you wanted the bag, he said once, smiling. No judgment. No lecture. Just clarity. And clarity is powerful. It tells your brain, you're not in danger. In those moments, I learned more English than I ever did forcing myself to memorize lists. I learned how climate affects daily conversations. How people bond over weather complaints. How small talk opens doors in American culture. These were not lessons from a book. They were lessons from living. Research supports this kind of learning. Studies on language acquisition show that contextual learning through real experiences, create stronger neural connections than isolated study. When words are tied to emotions, places, and people, they stay longer. That's why you remember English phrases from movies better than from grammar exercises. Emotion anchors memory. By the end of the first week, America still felt unfamiliar, but less threatening. The climate made sense. The routines became predictable. My English didn't suddenly become fluent, but it became usable. And that changed everything. I stopped hiding. I started trying. Not perfectly. Just honestly. If you are learning English and dreaming of living or traveling abroad, remember this. Your struggle is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of adjustment. Your brain is learning how to exist in a new system. Give it time. Give it kindness. And most importantly, give it real experiences. America didn't teach me English by speaking louder or slower. It taught me English by repeating life. Day after day. Conversation after conversation. And through that repetition, confidence grew quietly. Landing in a different America didn't break me. It reshaped me. And in the middle of unfamiliar weather, fast talkers and cultural surprises, I found something steady. A rhythm. A connection. A reason to keep listening. When English went silent. There is a specific kind of fear that appears when your English suddenly disappears. Not slowly. Not politely. It vanishes all at once, like someone turned off the sound inside your head. You're standing there, listening, nodding, smiling, and nothing is landing. The words pass by, perfectly clear in sound, completely empty in meaning. This is the moment most learners don't talk about. The moment when English doesn't feel hard, it feels gone. That moment found me on an ordinary afternoon. No drama. No pressure. Just a simple conversation that should have been easy. Someone asked me a question. I recognized every word individually. But together, they collapsed. My brain froze. My mouth waited for instructions that never came. I laughed softly, hoping time would fix it. It didn't. This is where many people blame themselves. You tell yourself you didn't study enough. You missed something. You're not talented with languages. But neuroscience tells a very different story. What you experienced is called cognitive shutdown. When stress rises too quickly, the brain reduces access to higher-level processing. Language lives in that higher level. So when your heart races, your breathing shortens, your English is the first thing to disappear. Basically, your brain pulls the emergency brake. The problem is, the more you panic, the harder you try. And the harder you try, the more pressure you create. It becomes a loop. Effort increases. Results decrease. Silence grows louder. This is why people say, I understand English at home, but not in real life. At home, your brain feels safe. Outside, it feels watched. In those early days in America, silence became my shadow. I avoided conversations. I chose self-checkout lines. I rehearsed sentences before speaking, then abandoned them halfway through. Every mistake felt bigger than it was. Every pause felt like proof I didn't belong. And here's the cruel part. The people around me weren't judging. I was. Psychologists call this internalized evaluation. When you imagine criticism, your brain reacts as if it's real. The stress response activates even without actual danger. So even kind environments can feel hostile if your inner voice is harsh enough. My English didn't fail me. My self-talk did. And then something small happened. Something unremarkable from the outside. I told him quietly, sometimes my English just stops. I expected advice, corrections, encouragement. What I got instead was a pause. A calm one. And then he said, "That's okay. We can wait." Waiting is powerful. When no one rushes you, your nervous system resets. Your breathing slows. Your brain receives a signal it rarely gets during learning. There is no threat. In that space, words return on their own. Not perfectly, but honestly. I finished my sentence. Slowly. Wrong grammar. Right meaning. Research backs this up. Studies in language anxiety show that perceived time pressure significantly reduces speaking performance. Remove the clock, and fluency improves. Not because you learned more, but because fear stepped aside. English doesn't need force. It needs permission. After that day, I started noticing how often English went silent for others too. At stores. At bus stops. In waiting rooms. You can see it in people's eyes. That moment of searching. The apology smile. The sorry, my English that comes before anything else. Silence isn't absence. It's hesitation. And hesitation is emotional, not intellectual. So I changed one thing. I stopped fighting silence. When my English paused, I didn't rush to fill it. I let it exist. Silence, I learned, is not a failure in American culture the way we think it is. Short pauses are normal. Thinking is allowed. You are not required to perform at native speed to be understood. Most people are not listening for perfection. They are listening for meaning. This shift changed how I practiced too. Instead of drilling words, I practiced patience. I practiced finishing thoughts instead of sentences. I practiced breathing before speaking. These are not language skills. They are regulation skills. And they matter more than vocabulary. There is a principle in psychology called state-dependent learning. You remember information better when your emotional state during learning matches your emotional state during use. If you only study English when you're calm but try to speak it when you're anxious, your brain struggles to retrieve it. The solution is not more studying. It's learning to stay calm while using English. Love helped with that, unexpectedly. Not because it was romantic, but because it was steady. There was no pressure to impress. No timeline to meet. No score to achieve. Just conversation that unfolded naturally. English came back in pieces. Weather comments. Daily plans. Small jokes. Each success rebuilt trust between my brain and the language. By the end of that week, English still went silent sometimes. But it didn't scare me anymore. Silence stopped being a signal to quit. It became a signal to slow down. And slowing down is not weakness. It's strategy. If English has ever gone silent on you, listen closely. It's not telling you to stop. It's asking you to feel safe again. Give it space. Give it time. Give yourself permission to be human before being fluent. Because English doesn't disappear when you're failing. It disappears when you're afraid. Love before stability. There is a strange moment in life when love shows up before you feel ready to be chosen. Not after you've built something impressive. Not after you've proven your worth. But right in the middle of uncertainty, when your life still looks unfinished. That's where this part of my story begins. Not with romance. Not with confidence. But with instability, emotional, financial, and linguistic. I met him at a time when nothing in my life felt solid. My English was fragile. My plans were unclear. My sense of identity felt blurry, like a photo taken too fast. In America, stability is often the unspoken requirement before commitment. People ask what you do, where you're going, what your next step is. I had answers, but they didn't sound strong. They didn't sound impressive. And yet, somehow, that didn't scare him away. He wasn't rich. Not financially, not socially, not in the way success is usually measured here. No big apartment. No luxury habits. No confident talk about the future. What he had instead was presence. He listened without fixing. He asked without interrogating. He stayed without demanding proof. And that, surprisingly, made my English feel safer. When you love someone before stability, every conversation carries weight. There's no performance. No pretending. You don't hide behind polished language because you don't have any. You speak simply because that's all you can do. And simple English, I learned, is not weak English. It's honest English. Our conversations were slow. Painfully slow sometimes. I searched for words. I repeated myself. I corrected mid-sentence. And instead of frustration, there was patience. That patience changed how my brain associated English. Instead of pressure, English became connection. Instead of fear, it became expression. Psychology explains this better than romance ever could. When you feel accepted without conditions, your brain releases oxytocin, a hormone linked to trust and bonding. Oxytocin reduces anxiety and increases openness. In that state, learning becomes easier. Memory improves. Speech flows more naturally. Love, in this sense, didn't distract me from learning English. It supported it. But loving before stability is not comfortable. It brings questions, doubts, quiet fears you don't always say out loud. I wondered if I was being irresponsible. If I should wait until my English improved. Until my life looked more put together. Until I had something more to offer. These thoughts came late at night, when confidence disappears and logic takes over. And here's the truth most people avoid. Many relationships are delayed not because of lack of love, but because of fear of being seen unfinished. We want to be fluent before speaking, successful before committing, stable before choosing. But life doesn't wait for perfect timing. And neither does growth. Learning English taught me this lesson long before love did. You don't become fluent and then speak. You speak badly for a long time, and fluency grows quietly in the background. Love works the same way. You don't become ready and then love. You love, and readiness develops through the process. There were moments when my English failed completely during emotional conversations. I couldn't express what I felt. My vocabulary wasn't big enough for nuance. So I used simple sentences. I'm scared. I don't know. I need time. And somehow, those sentences carried more truth than anything polished ever could. This is something language learners rarely hear. Emotional honesty requires less language than intellectual explanation. You don't need advanced grammar to be understood. You need clarity. You need intention. You need courage. Research on communication supports this. Studies show that perceived sincerity matters more than linguistic accuracy in emotional conversations. People respond to tone, pauses, and intent more than perfect structure. In other words, your English doesn't need to be impressive to be meaningful. Loving before stability also forced me to face American cultural expectations. Here, independence is celebrated. Self-sufficiency is praised. Depending on someone, emotionally or financially, is often seen as weakness. That pressure seeps into relationships. You feel like you must arrive whole, not growing. But growth is messy. And hiding it is exhausting. He didn't expect completeness. He expected honesty. And honesty, for me, came in broken English and unfinished plans. That was enough. As days passed, my English improved in small, invisible ways. Not because I studied more, but because I spoke more without fear. I stopped rehearsing sentences in my head. I started trusting that meaning would come through, even if form didn't. That trust spilled into other areas of life. I walked taller. I spoke slower. I apologized less. There's a concept in psychology called secure base. When you feel emotionally supported, you explore more confidently. Love became that base. Not because it solved my problems, but because it made them feel manageable. English stopped being a test of worth. It became a tool to build something real. If you're learning English and waiting to feel ready before living your life, hear this gently. Readiness is not a requirement. It's a result. You don't wait for stability to love. You don't wait for fluency to speak. You begin where you are with what you have. I fell in love before he was rich. And I found my voice before my English was perfect. Sometimes, choosing before stability is not a risk. It's the reason growth happens at all. Climate, culture, and small talks. If you think small talk is meaningless, America will quickly prove you wrong. Here, weather is not just weather. It's a social key. A soft entry into connection. A way to say, I see you, without asking anything personal. And when you're learning English, these tiny conversations become unexpected classrooms. Quiet, powerful, and everywhere. The climate was the first teacher. In just a few days, I learned that Americans don't simply experience weather, they discuss it constantly. Cold mornings turn into comments. Sudden sunshine becomes a shared surprise. It's colder than yesterday. This winter is weird. Wait 5 minutes, it'll change. These sentences repeat like a chorus. At first, they sounded like noise. Then, slowly, they became familiar. Familiarity reduced fear. Fear reduction opened space for learning. Climate affects culture more than we realize. In colder regions, people plan. They check forecasts. They dress in layers. Conversations begin with preparation. In warmer places, life feels looser, lighter. Schedules bend. Small talk flows easier. Understanding this helped my English in a strange way. I stopped translating words and started reading context. Tone. Body language. Timing. English is not just spoken. It's felt. Small talk terrified me at first. Not because it was complex, but because it was unpredictable. There was no script. No correct answer. Someone might comment on the weather, the traffic, or the line moving slowly. You're expected to respond, not perfectly, just appropriately. That expectation felt heavy when my English was slow. But here's what I learned. Small talk in America is not about information. It's about alignment. You're not being tested. You're being invited. Once I understood that, everything changed. Instead of searching for smart responses, I chose simple ones. Yeah, it's cold today. I didn't expect the rain. This place is busy. These sentences are basic. Almost boring. And that's the point. Small talk works because it's safe. It gives your brain a low-risk opportunity to practice speaking without emotional stakes. Linguists call this phatic communication, language used to build social bonds rather than exchange facts. And research shows that this type of language plays a critical role in fluency development. It reduces anxiety. It increases exposure. It trains rhythm and intonation. You're not learning words. You're learning flow. I practiced English everywhere without calling it practice. At the bus stop. In elevators. In checkout lines. Not long conversations. Just one sentence. Sometimes two. And every time, my confidence grew a little. Not dramatically. Quietly. Culture shaped these interactions too. Americans value positivity in small talk. Complaints are light, almost playful. Sarcasm exists, but it's gentle. Direct negativity feels uncomfortable in casual spaces. Once I understood this, I adjusted my tone. I smiled more. I softened my words. Communication became smoother, not because my English improved overnight, but because my cultural awareness did. He helped me notice these patterns. "They're just being friendly," he said once, when I overanalyzed a conversation. "You don't have to say much." That sentence stayed with me. You don't have to say much. For someone learning English, that realization is freeing. Climate also influenced daily routines, which shaped language exposure. Weather dictated when people gathered, when they stayed inside, when conversations happened naturally. On cold days, cafes filled up. On sunny afternoons, parks became classrooms. Language followed life, not the other way around. There's strong evidence supporting this kind of learning. Studies in second language acquisition show that contextual repetition, hearing similar phrases in similar situations, accelerates comprehension. Your brain learns faster when it can predict what comes next. Weather talk is predictable. Cultural habits repeat. And repetition builds confidence. What surprised me most was how small talk connected to love. Our conversations didn't start deep. They started simple. Weather comments. Daily observations. Shared annoyances. Over time, those small exchanges built trust. And trust made deeper conversations possible later. English followed the same path. Surface first. Depth later. Many learners believe they must master grammar before speaking. But grammar without context is fragile. It breaks under pressure. Small talk gives language a place to live. It grounds English in reality. And when language feels real, your brain stops resisting it. By the end of the second week, small talk no longer scared me. I didn't love it. But I respected it. I saw it as a bridge, not a test. A warm-up, not a performance. And that mindset changed everything. If you're learning English and avoiding conversations because they feel pointless, try this. Don't aim for deep. Aim for present. Comment on what's around you. Weather. Waiting. Movement. These moments are designed for learners, even if no one says it out loud. Climate shapes culture. Culture shapes conversation. Conversation shapes confidence. And confidence shapes fluency. English doesn't grow in isolation. It grows in ordinary moments you almost ignore. Learning English through him. At some point, I realized something uncomfortable but honest. I was learning more English through him than through any app one had ever downloaded. Not because he was teaching me, and not because he was correcting me, but because he was living in English and letting me walk beside him at my own speed. There were no lessons. No schedules. Just life unfolding in slow, understandable sentences. We didn't sit down and say, "Let's practice English." That would have ruined it. Practice sounds like pressure. Instead, English appeared naturally, the way music plays in the background when you're not paying attention. While making breakfast, he would say, "The eggs are almost done." While driving, "Traffic is lighter today." While walking, "It's colder than yesterday." Ordinary sentences. Repeated daily. And repetition, when it's gentle, is magic. This is something language science supports strongly. The brain learns best through what researchers call comprehensible input. Language that is slightly above your current level, but still understandable through context. His English lived exactly there. Simple vocabulary. Clear pronunciation. Natural rhythm. My brain didn't have to fight it. It could relax and absorb. The biggest difference, though, was how mistakes were handled. Or rather, how they weren't. When I said something wrong, he didn't stop me. He didn't interrupt. He responded to the meaning, not the error. Later, sometimes much later, he would casually repeat the sentence correctly in his own speech. No correction. Just modeling. And without realizing it, my brain copied him. Psychologists call this implicit learning. You acquire patterns without conscious effort. Children learn this way. Adults can too, but only when anxiety is low. Every time he responded calmly, my fear decreased. And when fear decreases, fluency rises. It's not motivational. It's biological. Our conversations were slow, especially at first. I used pauses like punctuation. I spoke in fragments. Sometimes I stopped mid-thought and started again. And instead of impatience, there was space. That space did something powerful. It told my nervous system that English was not an emergency. It was allowed to take time. This matters more than people think. Research on speech production shows that time pressure is one of the biggest inhibitors of fluency. Remove the rush, and speech improves naturally. Not immediately, but steadily. I noticed that after a few days, I needed fewer pauses. My sentences connected more easily. Not because I tried harder, but because my body stopped resisting. We also shared silence. Long silences. Comfortable ones. In many cultures, silence feels awkward. In learning English, silence often feels like failure. But silence, I learned, is part of communication. It gives your brain time to process, organize, and prepare. Silence is not empty. It's productive. Another thing that helped was emotional relevance. We talked about real things. Daily plans. Small worries. Random thoughts. Not textbook topics. Real life carries emotional weight, and emotional weight improves memory. Studies show that emotionally charged content is remembered longer and retrieved faster. When English carried meaning, it stayed. Sometimes I tested myself without realizing it. I would try to explain a feeling or an idea using the simplest words possible. I feel off today. This place feels strange. I'm nervous but excited. These sentences are not advanced, but they are precise. And precision builds confidence. Through him, I also learned American conversational habits. How people soften opinions. How they show agreement. How they signal listening with short sounds like yeah, right, I see. These micro-responses are rarely taught, but they matter. They make conversations feel smooth. Once I started using them, people responded more warmly. Communication improved, even if my grammar didn't. There is a psychological concept called mirror neurons. When we observe someone performing an action calmly, our brain simulates that state. His calmness became mine. His pace slowed my pace. And English, which once felt aggressive and loud, became gentle. Love, in this context, was not dramatic. It was regulating. It brought my nervous system into balance. And from that balance, learning happened naturally. I wasn't chasing fluency. I was living in English. By the end of the second week, I noticed something subtle. I stopped translating in my head as much. Words came directly. Not all the time, but often enough to feel progress. That progress didn't come from effort. It came from exposure wrapped in safety. If you are learning English, you don't need a perfect teacher. You need a safe environment. Someone or something that allows you to exist in English without judgment. It could be a person, a podcast, a story like this one. Safety is the real curriculum. Learning English through him taught me a simple truth. Language grows where you feel seen, not where you feel tested. And once English feels human, it stops feeling impossible. Money stress and marriage talks. There is a moment in every serious relationship when love stops being poetic and starts being practical. It usually begins with a simple question that sounds harmless but isn't. So, what's the plan? In America, this question carries weight. It doesn't just ask about tomorrow. It asks about income, stability, insurance, housing, and responsibility. And when your English is still fragile, this question feels heavier than it should. Money stress entered our story quietly. Not through arguments, but through pauses. Longer pauses. Conversations that circled the same topics without landing anywhere. Jobs. Bills. Future plans. Immigration paperwork. Health insurance. These are not romantic subjects, but they are unavoidable in American life. And they require language. Clear, uncomfortable language. I noticed something about myself during those talks. When emotions were high, my English dropped. Not completely silent, but thinner. Less flexible. I reached for simple words because complex ones felt risky. I'm worried. I don't know yet. This scares me. In another context, these sentences might sound weak. Here, they were honest. And honesty mattered more than fluency. Psychology explains why this happens. Under emotional stress, the brain prioritizes clarity over complexity. You don't reach for fancy language when you're afraid. You reach for truth. That's not a failure of English. It's a feature of being human. Emotional conversations are not vocabulary tests. They are alignment tests. American culture adds another layer to this pressure. Financial independence is deeply tied to identity here. Being put together often means being financially stable. Conversations about marriage quickly turn into conversations about logistics. Where will we live? How will we pay for things? Who carries what responsibility? These are reasonable questions. But when you're still building your footing, they can feel like judgment. I worried that my uncertainty made me less desirable, less reliable, less adult. And because my English wasn't strong enough to explain all the nuance, my fears grew louder in my head. This is where many learners shut down. Not because they don't care, but because they don't have the language to defend themselves emotionally. What helped wasn't finding better words. It was slowing the conversation down. We started talking in smaller pieces. One concern at a time. One sentence at a time. I learned that you don't need to solve your entire future in one conversation. You need to be understood in this moment. That shift reduced pressure instantly. And when pressure dropped, English came back. There's a concept in communication psychology called cognitive load. When too many variables are discussed at once, comprehension decreases. This applies to relationships and language equally. By breaking conversations into smaller units, we made them manageable, not just emotionally, but linguistically. Money stress also forced me to confront something uncomfortable about myself. I associated financial success with worth. And because I didn't feel successful yet, I felt apologetic. I said sorry too much. For my English. For my uncertainty. For needing time. That habit didn't come from him. It came from me. Studies show that excessive self-apologizing increases anxiety and reduces perceived confidence, even when others don't judge you. Once I realized this, I changed one small behavior. I replaced sorry with give me a moment. That's it. One phrase. But it changed the tone of conversations completely. I wasn't apologizing for existing. I was asking for space. Marriage talks also revealed how much language shapes power dynamics. When one person speaks more fluently, they often control the direction of the conversation unintentionally. We noticed this and adjusted. He slowed down. I asked for clarification without shame. Can you say that again, slower? What does that mean exactly? These questions are not signs of weakness. They are tools of equality. Research in intercultural relationships supports this. Couples who openly negotiate language pace and clarity report higher satisfaction and lower conflict. Understanding is built intentionally, not assumed. Love doesn't erase differences. It learns to work with them. There were moments when fear crept back in. Late nights. Quiet doubts. Questions about timing. About risk. About choosing love before security. But each honest conversation chipped away at that fear. English didn't need to be perfect. It needed to be real. I also learned that stability is not something you bring into a relationship fully formed. It's something you build together. Financial plans evolve. Careers change. Language improves. None of this happens overnight. Expecting perfection at the start only delays growth. If you're learning English and navigating serious relationships, remember this. You are not behind. You are in process. Money stress doesn't mean love is wrong. It means life is real. And real life is the best language teacher you'll ever have. English didn't fail me during those hard talks. It simplified me. And sometimes, simple is exactly what honesty needs. The 2-week turning point. There is a moment when change doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't come with fireworks or clarity. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly, and only later do you realize something inside you has shifted. For me, that moment happened during these last 2 weeks in America. Not on the first day. Not when I felt brave. But when I stopped measuring myself every hour. At the beginning of those 2 weeks, my English felt fragile. I could function, but every conversation drained me. I listened with tension in my shoulders. I spoke with caution in my throat. I kept a mental score of mistakes. This is how many learners live. Constantly monitoring themselves, constantly correcting, constantly tired. What I didn't know was that improvement was already happening beneath the surface. The turning point wasn't an achievement. It was a release. One morning, I realized I had understood an entire conversation without translating it in my head. Not perfectly. Not every word. but enough. And more importantly, I didn't panic when I missed something. My body stayed calm. My breath stayed steady. That calmness was new. And calmness changes everything. Neuroscience explains this beautifully. Learning accelerates when the brain exits hypervigilance. Hypervigilance keeps you alert, but it blocks integration. Integration is where language becomes automatic. During those 2 weeks, repetition, emotional safety, and routine slowly lowered my stress baseline. My brain finally had room to connect patterns. Another shift happened in how I spoke. I stopped aiming for correctness and started aiming for continuity. Instead of restarting sentences to fix grammar, I finished thoughts. That simple choice made my English sound more confident, even when it wasn't technically accurate. Research in communication shows that listeners value coherence more than correctness. A complete idea feels stronger than a perfect fragment. Daily life supported this change. We followed routines. Morning coffee. Short walks. Familiar stores. Familiar frases. Routine reduces cognitive load. When your environment becomes predictable, your brain has more energy for language. This is why immersion works best when life is simple, not chaotic. Emotionally, something softened too. I stopped treating English as proof of worth. I didn't need to earn the right to speak. I already belonged in the conversation. That belief didn't come from motivation. It came from experience. From being understood even when my words were imperfect. There was also a noticeable shift in how I listened. Earlier, I listened for accuracy. Now, I listened for intention, tone, direction, emotion. This mirrors how native speakers actually understand each other. Studies show that meaning is often inferred from context rather than precise wording. Once I trusted context, my comprehension improved dramatically. The relationship mirrored this transformation. Conversations became easier, lighter. Not because problems disappeared, but because communication stopped feeling like a performance. English became the medium, not the obstacle. When language stops being the focus, connection grows faster. One evening, I caught myself laughing mid-conversation without translating the joke. That moment sounds small, but it isn't. Humor requires timing, cultural understanding, and emotional presence. Laughter is a sign that language has moved from the head into the body. It's one of the clearest indicators of real progress. From a psychological perspective, this is identity shift. I stopped seeing myself as someone learning English and started seeing myself as someone who lives in English sometimes. Identity change stabilizes behavior. When you identify differently, your actions follow naturally. You speak more. You avoid less. You recover faster from mistakes. The 2-week turning point didn't make me fluent. That's not the point. It made me steady. And steadiness is far more powerful than bursts of confidence. Confidence comes and goes. Steadiness stays. It allows learning to compound quietly over time. If you're listening to this and feeling impatient, hear this carefully. Progress often shows up as reduced effort, not increased performance. When things feel easier, even if they're not perfect, that's growth. When you stop overthinking, that's growth. When English stops feeling like a threat, that's growth. Most learners quit right before this phase. They mistake calm for stagnation. But calm is the doorway. Behind it, language organizes itself naturally. You don't force it. You allow it. Those 2 weeks taught me something fundamental. Change doesn't require intensity. It requires consistency in a safe environment. Love provided safety. Routine provided consistency. English took advantage of both. If you are still struggling, don't look for breakthroughs. Look for softening. Look for moments when you don't tense up, when you don't apologize, when you don't rush. Those moments are signals. They mean your brain is finally learning the way it was designed to. The turning point wasn't about English. It was about trust. And once trust appeared, progress followed quietly. How the brain learns safely. Most people believe learning English is about effort. More hours. More repetition. More discipline. But after everything I experienced in these 2 weeks, I learned something that sounds almost disappointing at first. Your brain does not learn best when you push it. It learns best when it feels safe. Safety sounds soft, unscientific, almost lazy. But neuroscience tells a very clear story. When the brain detects threat, social threat, emotional threat, or the fear of embarrassment, it redirects energy away from learning systems and into survival systems. Language lives in the learning system. So when you feel judged, rushed, or compared, your brain quietly shuts the door. This explains something every English learner has felt but rarely understands. You study for months. You know the words. You understand the grammar. And then someone speaks to you unexpectedly, and everything disappears. That's not lack of knowledge. That's lack of safety. Your brain thinks something bad might happen. In psychology, this is connected to the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting danger. The amygdala does not distinguish between physical danger and social danger. To your brain, being embarrassed can feel as threatening as being chased. So when you worry about sounding stupid, your brain reacts fast. Too fast. It cuts access to language. Once I understood this, I stopped asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, "Why am I bad at English?" I asked, "When does my brain feel safe enough to speak?" The answer surprised me. My brain felt safest when there was no performance. No timer. No correction mid-sentence. No pressure to be impressive. Just space. Space to pause. space to breathe, space to be incomplete. That space didn't come from studying harder. It came from the environment. This is why learning English through stories works so well. Stories lower the brain's defenses. When you listen to a story, your brain enters what scientists call a narrative state. In this state, critical judgment decreases, emotional engagement increases, and memory retention improves. You are not trying to learn. You are following meaning. And meaning sticks. That's exactly what happened to me. English stopped being an exam and started being a story I was inside. My own story. And because I cared about what was happening, my brain stayed open. There's also something called the window of tolerance. This is the emotional zone where learning is possible. Too much stress pushes you out of it. Too little engagement also pushes you out. The sweet spot is calm interest. Not excitement. Not fear. Calm curiosity. Love helped create that state. Routine supported it. And English slid in naturally. Another key principle is predictability. The brain relaxes when it can predict what comes next. That's why repeated phrases, familiar topics, and daily routines are so powerful. When conversations followed similar patterns, weather, plans, daily life, my brain stopped scanning for danger. It knew what to expect. And once prediction stabilized, comprehension improved. This is also why speaking slowly is not a weakness. Slowness gives the brain time to stay regulated. Fast speech overwhelms working memory. Slow speech allows integration. Research shows that reduced speech rate significantly improves comprehension and recall in second language learners. Your brain needs time, not pressure. I noticed another important change. I stopped correcting myself while speaking. Self-correction feels productive, but it often increases anxiety. When you interrupt yourself, you signal to your brain that mistakes are dangerous. That pulls you out of safety. Instead, I let mistakes pass. Communication continued. Meaning survived. And later, without effort, accuracy improved. This aligns with how the brain actually learns patterns. You don't fix every error consciously. Your brain adjusts through exposure. Like tuning an instrument slowly, not snapping strings tighter. Safe learning also changed how I listened. I stopped listening for errors. I listened for intention. This reduced mental load dramatically. When you stop chasing every word, you free up attention for context. Context carries meaning. Meaning carries memory. One of the most important realizations was this. Motivation does not create safety. Safety creates motivation. When learning feels threatening, discipline drains quickly. When learning feels safe, curiosity appears naturally. I didn't force myself to engage with English. I wanted to. If you're struggling with English right now, don't ask yourself how to push harder. Ask yourself how to feel safer. That might mean choosing slower content, familiar topics, gentle voices, stories instead of drills. It might mean practicing alone without judgment before speaking with others, or finding environments where mistakes are ignored. Safety is not comfort forever. It's a foundation. Once your brain trusts the language, you can challenge it. But without trust, challenge feels like attack. The biggest myth in language learning is that discomfort equals growth. Some discomfort is normal. Chronic fear is not. Growth happens at the edge of comfort, not deep inside panic. My English didn't improve because I became braver. It improved because my brain stopped feeling threatened. When learning feels safe, your brain does what it was designed to do. Small English, big confidence. Most people believe confidence comes after fluency. That once your English is good enough, you'll finally feel relaxed, expressive, and sure of yourself. But after everything I experienced, I learned the opposite. Confidence does not wait for big English. It grows from small English used consistently, without apology. At the beginning of my time in America, I believed I needed better sentences to sound confident. Longer sentences. Smarter words. Cleaner grammar. What actually happened was very different. The moments when I felt strongest were not when I spoke the most, but when I said a little, and stood by it. Small English is powerful because it's manageable. It doesn't overload your brain. It doesn't invite panic. It allows you to stay present. When your brain stays present, your body relaxes. And when your body relaxes, your voice stabilizes. People don't respond to perfect English. They respond to grounded English. There's a psychological principle called self-efficacy, the belief that you can handle what's happening right now. Self-efficacy grows from success experiences, not from potential. When you use small English and it works, your brain records a win. I said something. It landed. I survived. That tiny success builds confidence faster than studying 10 new words you're afraid to use. I started intentionally choosing small English. Not because I couldn't do more, but because I wanted to succeed more often. Instead of complex explanations, I used simple structures. Subject, verb, feeling. I need time. I'm not ready yet. This is new for me. These sentences are not impressive. They are effective. And something unexpected happened. People leaned in. They listened more carefully. Simplicity made my communication clearer. In conversations about plans, money, or emotions, clarity mattered more than sophistication. I wasn't hiding behind language. I was standing inside it. Research supports this approach. Studies in communication psychology show that perceived confidence is strongly linked to speech clarity and pacing, not vocabulary size. Speakers who use fewer words but speak calmly are rated as more confident than those who speak more but appear anxious. Confidence is a signal, not a skill. Small English also reduced my fear of mistakes. When you use complex language, mistakes feel expensive. When you use simple language, mistakes feel lighter. That lightness encouraged experimentation. I spoke more. I adjusted faster. Learning accelerated because usage increased. There's also something important about ownership. When you use simple sentences, they feel like yours. You don't borrow them from textbooks. You live inside them. That ownership builds identity. I wasn't trying English. I was using it. And that shift matters. I noticed this especially in emotional conversations. Instead of over-explaining, I named feelings directly. I'm overwhelmed. This matters to me. I'm afraid of getting it wrong. These sentences created connection instantly. They didn't require advanced grammar. They required honesty. Neuroscience explains why this works. When language is emotionally aligned, the brain processes it more efficiently. Emotional congruence reduces internal conflict. You're not fighting to sound better than you feel. Your words match your state. That alignment reduces cognitive load and increases fluency. Another habit changed everything. I stopped softening my speech excessively. No more constant apologies. No more shrinking sentences. Instead of sorry, my English is not good, I said, give me a moment. That one change shifted how people responded to me. I wasn't asking for forgiveness. I was setting pace. This ties into something called conversational framing. The way you introduce your speech affects how it's received. Apologies frame you as a burden. Requests frame you as a participant. When you change the frame, confidence follows. Small English also helped me stay consistent. Big goals feel heavy. Small actions feel doable. I didn't aim to speak better today. I aimed to say one clear thing, and then another. Consistency compounds quietly. Over days, then weeks, progress became visible. By the end of the second week, my English hadn't transformed dramatically, but my relationship with it had. I no longer waited for the perfect moment to speak. I spoke when I had something to say, using what I had. That's confidence. If you're learning English and waiting to feel confident, stop waiting. Start small. Choose clarity over complexity. Presence over performance. Confidence is not a reward for fluency. It's the soil fluency grows in. Small English didn't limit me. It grounded me. And from that ground, confidence rose naturally. The quiet choice that changed everything. The morning light entered the room slowly. Not loudly. Not suddenly. It slipped through the thin white curtains and rested on the floor, as if it did not want to disturb anyone. I woke up before the alarm. That almost never happened to me. For a moment, I stayed still. I listened. No voices. No messages. No expectations waiting outside the door. Just my breath. In. Out. I realized something important then. This was the first morning in a long time when I did not feel afraid of the day ahead. I sat up on the bed and looked around the room. It looked the same as always. The same desk. The same chair. The same quiet corner where I used to overthink everything. But I was not the same. Yesterday had ended without drama. No big argument. No dramatic goodbye. Just a simple decision, spoken softly, but carried with full certainty. I choose myself. At the time, the words felt small, almost too simple to matter. But this morning, I understood their weight. I made coffee slowly. I did not rush. I did not check my phone. As the water boiled, I watched the steam rise. It reminded me of how my thoughts used to feel. Always rising, never settling. Now there was space. I sat by the window with my cup and let the silence stay with me. It was not empty silence. It was a peaceful one. For a long time, I believed that choosing myself meant being selfish. That it meant hurting others. That it meant walking away from love. But I was wrong. Choosing myself did not mean I stopped caring. It meant I stopped disappearing. I thought about all the times I said yes, when my heart was screaming no. All the times I stayed quiet to keep the peace. All the times I convinced myself that love required pain. I had mistaken endurance for strength, and silence for loyalty. But love was never supposed to feel like losing yourself. Later that day, I went for a walk. No destination. Just movement. The street was busy, but I felt calm. People passed by, each carrying their own stories, their own invisible battles. For the first time, I did not feel the need to compare my life to theirs. I did not feel behind. I did not feel late. I was exactly where I needed to be. I stopped at a small park and sat on a bench. A child laughed nearby. An old couple walked slowly, hand in hand. Life was happening. Not loudly. Not perfectly. But honestly. I realized something else then. Healing does not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as relief. There was no moment where everything suddenly made sense. No clear ending tied with a bow. Just acceptance. I accepted that some people were lessons, not destinations. I accepted that love can be real and still not be right. I accepted that walking away does not erase what once mattered. It simply makes room for what comes next. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. Not to analyze. Not to explain. Just one sentence. I trust myself now. I closed the notebook and smiled. A small smile. A real one. Before sleeping, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. What kind of life do I want to wake up to every day? The answer did not come as a detailed plan. It came as a feeling. Peace. Honesty. Freedom. I turned off the light. As the room darkened, I felt something rare. Contentment without conditions. No promises to anyone else. No expectations placed on my future self. Just this moment. And the quiet confidence that I would protect it. Tomorrow would bring challenges. I knew that. There would still be doubts. Still moments of weakness. Still days when the past tried to knock on my door. But now, I knew how to answer. Not with anger. Not with fear. But with clarity. Some stories do not end with applause. They end with understanding. And sometimes, that is the most powerful ending of all. When the past knocked, I didn't open the door. A few weeks passed quietly. Life did not suddenly become perfect. But it became steady. I began to notice small changes in myself. I woke up with less tension in my shoulders. I breathed more deeply without reminding myself to do it. I laughed more easily. Not loudly. Not to impress anyone. Just real laughter. One afternoon, while organizing old files on my computer, I found messages I had forgotten about. Drafts I never sent. Notes written during sleepless nights. They were full of questions. Full of doubt. Full of someone who was trying very hard to be enough. I read them slowly. Not with judgment. Not with shame. But with compassion. That version of me did the best they could with what they knew at the time. And that was enough. Later that day, my phone buzzed. A familiar name appeared on the screen. For a moment, my body reacted before my mind did. My heart sped up. My hands felt cold. The past had a way of doing that. It didn't ask for permission before showing up. I stared at the screen. I did not answer. Not yet. I sat down and asked myself one simple question. Why does this message matter to me? Not what it meant. Not what it could lead to. Just why it mattered. The answer surprised me. It mattered because I used to believe that closure came from other people. From explanations. From apologies. But I had learned something important. Closure is something you give yourself. I didn't need to reopen a door I had already closed with intention. Not every knock deserves an answer. I placed the phone face down and went to make tea. I focused on the small actions. The sound of water pouring. The warmth of the cup in my hands. When I returned, the phone was silent again. And I felt proud of myself. Not because I was strong, but because I was honest. That night, I reflected on how far I had come. There was a time when I would have replied immediately. When I would have searched for hidden meanings in every word. when I would have convinced myself that one conversation could fix everything. But growth had changed my instincts. I no longer needed to be chosen again to feel worthy. I no longer needed validation disguised as reconciliation. I had chosen myself, and I was standing by that choice. In the following days, I noticed something else. My mind was quieter. Thoughts still came, of course, but they no longer shouted. They spoke. And when a thought no longer served me, I let it pass. Not forcefully, not angrily, just gently. I started doing things simply because they made me feel alive. Walking without headphones. Cooking without rushing. Sitting in silence without reaching for distraction. These moments were not exciting, but they were grounding. I realized that peace does not need to announce itself. It just stays. One evening, while watching the sky change colors, I understood something deeply. The past only has power when we invite it back in. When we give it a seat at the table of our present. And I no longer needed to do that. I could honor what had been, without reliving it, without reopening wounds that had finally healed. That realization felt like freedom. Before going to sleep, I wrote another sentence in my notebook. Not everything deserves a second chance. Some things deserve respect and distance. I turned off the light and lay in the dark. There was no heaviness in my chest. No fear of missing out. No sense of unfinished business. Just quiet certainty. I knew there would be moments ahead when memories would return. When emotions would resurface unexpectedly. Healing is not a straight line. It never is. But now, I trusted myself to respond, not react. I trusted myself to pause, to listen, to choose wisely. And that trust changed everything. Some people call it moving on. Some call it letting go. But for me, it felt like coming home, to myself. And maybe, this is not really the end. Maybe this is the moment you pause the video, take a breath, and ask yourself a question you've been avoiding. Are you living a life that feels honest to you? This story was never just about love. It was about self-respect. About choosing peace over chaos. About learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away quietly. If parts of this story felt familiar, if certain lines stayed with you longer than others, that's not a coincidence. It means you are changing too. But here's the truth most people don't tell you. Healing doesn't end with one story. There are still questions ahead. Still choices. Still moments where the past tries to pull you back. What happens after this choice? Does peace last? And what kind of love comes next, when you finally know your worth? That story is coming. If you're learning English and you want more slow, clear, real-life English stories like this, stories that help you listen better, speak naturally, and think in English without pressure, subscribe to the channel now. New stories are posted regularly, designed especially for English learners at intermediate and advanced levels. Like this video if the story made you feel something. Comment one sentence in English about what this story meant to you. Share it with someone who needs a quiet reminder that choosing yourself is okay. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. so you won't miss the next story, because the next chapter might sound uncomfortably familiar, in the best way. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, sometimes, the most powerful endings are the ones that quietly invite you to begin again.